The night was quiet except for the restless scratching. In the far corner of the old fire station, where the brick wall had darkened with soot and years of rain seepage, Canine Zeus pressed his paws hard against the surface. His claws scraped with a steady insistence, sending a muted rasp through the empty garage. The men who worked there had heard him bark before, had seen him leap into smoke-filled rooms without hesitation. But this sound was different, less urgent, more stubborn, as if something beyond instinct was pulling him toward the wall. Captain Reeves stood a few steps away, arms folded across his chest, watching with the wary patience of a man who had spent 30 years learning to trust dogs more than clocks or orders. He didn't call out, didn't scold Zeus to stop, though the dust rising from the bricks made his throat itch. Instead, he studied the animal's posture, the rigid tail, the rhythmic strike of claws, the occasional pause as the shepherd lowered his nose to sniff the crevices with sharp, quick breaths. It was not restlessness, it was intent. The garage. It smelled faintly of diesel and ash, old ghosts from fires long past. A cracked helmet hung on a nail, and cobwebs stretched between rusting ladders that hadn't seen daylight in months. Outside, the wind pressed against the thin doors with a low moan. Inside, time felt slowed, as if Zeus's scratching was the only sound anchoring the night. Reeves shifted his weight. He thought of the wall itself, how many times he had walked past it without noticing the uneven bulge in the mortar, the subtle difference in tone where bricks had been replaced decades ago. The station was older than him, older even than most of the men who rotated through its holes. He had never asked why one corner smelled faintly of damp earth after rain. He had never needed to. Until now. Zeus stopped suddenly, chest heaving, ears tilting back. He pressed his muzzle hard against the wall and let out a deep, muffled growl, the kind that traveled low through the air and seemed to lodge in a man's ribs. Reeves felt it before he heard it. Something in the dog's body. Language held him still. Zeus wasn't warning of danger in the ordinary sense. This was closer to unease, a disquiet that came from sense humans had no names for. The captain knelt down, his knees stiff, placing a hand against the cool brick. Nothing moved, nothing sounded from within. Yet Zeus backed up a pace, then lunged forward, striking the wall with his claws again as though desperate to break through. The bricks rattled faintly under his weight. Reeves thought about calling one of the younger men, maybe to bring a light or tools, but something about the intimacy of the moment stopped him. It felt wrong to disturb the quiet insistence of the animal with noise or questions. He reached out, laying his hand on the shepherd's broad back, feeling the tense muscles ripple under the fur. The dog turned his head slightly, one bright eye glancing at him, almost as though asking for confirmation, for permission. The captain did not give it. He only whispered a low sound, neither command nor encouragement, but an acknowledgement, and Zeus turned back to the wall. The scratching began again, louder this time, with an urgency that made the dust fall like pale snow onto the stained concrete floor. Something about the rhythm reminded Reeves of nails tapping from the other side, though he knew that was impossible. Still, he found himself leaning closer, holding his breath, waiting for an echo that might come for the first time in years. The old firehouse felt less like a shelter and more like a sealed chamber, a place that held something too long forgotten. The dog knew it. The man could feel it. When Zeus stopped at last, panting, the silence pressed in heavier than before. His claws had left pale scars along the dark brick, thin lines like the beginning of a map. Reeves stared at them, unsettled by how deliberate they looked, almost as if the animal was marking a boundary or a warning. The captain straightened, his voice caught in his throat. He did not speak, neither did the dog. The wind rattled the station doors once more, but inside, the stillness carried weight. Something was behind that wall, and for reasons he could not yet explain. Reeves was certain it was not meant to stay there forever. Reeves returned at dawn with a crowbar. The garage was washed in pale light that made the dust look like mist drifting from the rafters. Zeus was already waiting, body taut, eyes fixed on the same wall he had assaulted through the night. He had not eaten, he had not curled to rest. His chest rose and fell with a quiet determination that made the captain hesitate before lifting the tool. Something about breaking into a wall that had stood sealed longer than his career felt like trespass. The first strike sent a dull metallic clang through the station, echoing down the empty bays. Mortar cracked, small flecks scattering at his boots. Zeus lowered his head and growled not at the captain, but at the seam itself, as if urging him on. The dog's ears twitched with each crumble of brick, each hollow vibration. By the third strike, a faint smell drifted outward, musty and sharp, the odor of wood shut too long away from air. Reeves froze, nose catching something older beneath it. Animal musk, faint, almost gone but undeniably real. Zeus's body stiffened. He sat, tail curled tight, head tipped toward the opening. He did not advance, but his restraint carried weight, like a hunter measuring distance before a strike. Reeves leaned close, pushing his hand into the crevice. His fingers brushed dampness, softer than brick, something fibrous. He pulled away instinctively, heart thrumming in his throat. The dog gave a low bark, sharp and single, the kind he used when smoke was just beyond sight. A memory rose unbidden in the captain's mind. The year a stray had died in the rafters, weeks before the smell revealed its resting place. But this odor was different, subtler, almost buried in the mortar itself. He struck again, forcing the gap wider. Bricks toppled onto the floor, splitting into powder. Behind them, darkness yawned, not a hollow pocket but a deliberate space, as though someone had built a chamber no one was meant to find. Zeus lowered himself onto his belly, nose pressing into the opening, paws tucked beneath his chest. His breathing grew rapid. He pawed once, lightly, then stilled, the restraint unnatural for an animal trained to push forward. Reeves crouched beside him and peered in. A beam of thin light from the high window caught the edge of something wood, perhaps a box, its surface pale against the black interior. The captain reached with the crowbar, nudging. The wood shifted slightly, scraping stone. Dust poured outward in a soft plume, curling in the shafts of light. A shape came into view, not a neat box after all, but something more irregular. A board collapsed inward, revealing torn fabric clinging to it. Beneath the fabric, something glinted faintly, like metal dulled by years. Zeus wind, not fear, not eagerness, something else, a note Reeves could not place. The sound hung in the garage, thin and unsettled. He pushed again, and the object rolled forward enough to strike the floor with a muted thud. The fabric slipped aside. What lay beneath was not fresh, not alive, but unmistakable. A collar, wide, leather hardened by age, its clasp rusted shut. Still fastened to it, beneath strands of decayed material, were fragments of bone. Reeves sat back on his heels, throat tightening. Zeus stood suddenly, pacing in a sharp line, claws ticking on the floor. The dog circled the fallen collar, ears high, body taut, refusing to touch it. He barked once, deep, then cut himself short, as though the sound had echoed wrong in the cavernous space. The air felt heavier now, the faint musk clearer, as though released from its long entombment. Reeves thought of the station's past, of the generations of dogs trained here before Zeus, of handlers who had passed away, of fires that had erased whole streets. The collar was old, older than Zeus by decades. Yet the dog reacted as though its scent still carried meaning. He did not pick it up. He could not. Instead, he reached forward and dragged the fabric aside. The rest of the chamber revealed more splinters of bone, small and scattered, pressed into the soil floor of the cavity. Whoever had sealed the wall had done so not by accident, not as careless storage, but with intent. Zeus stopped pacing and sat by the gap facing the wall as if guarding it. His body was rigid, yet his eyes followed every movement of the captain's hand. It felt less like discovery and more like trespass, like they had stepped into something meant to remain untouched. Outside, the wind stirred again, carrying the smell of damp leaves through the cracked doors. Inside, silence pressed thick against the man and dog. Reeves leaned back, the crowbar resting across his knees. His breath felt loud in the stillness. He did not want to say the words that formed in his mind, because once spoken, they would make the discovery undeniable. And yet, as Zeus lowered his head to the ground, resting his chin near the broken bricks without closing his eyes, the unspoken truth hung heavier than the dust. Something someone had sealed, more than stone inside that wall. The wall gave way, not with drama but with a subtle crumble, the sound of mortar loosening under years of hidden strain. Captain Reeves had only pressed the flat of his palm against the faint crack when the brick shifted inward with a reluctant sigh. Dust drifted into the dim light, curling through the air like smoke from a fire long gone. Zeus backed up a step, his ears angled forward, his body rigid yet restrained, as if holding back from crossing a threshold only he fully sensed. The cavity revealed itself slowly, at first only darkness, then, with the faint glow of the overhead lamp catching the edges, the outline of something unnatural appeared. A wooden box, aged to the color of burnt cedar, rested within the hollow. Its surface was scarred, not by time alone but by deliberate gouges, as though someone had tried to erase markings once carved there. The air that seeped out was cooler, laced with a damp metallic temp that clung to the throat. Reeves did not move immediately. He stood with his hand still against the brick, pulse steady but heavy, while the shepherd shifted closer. Zeus pressed his nose toward the opening, drawing in long searching breaths, before letting out a muted whine that was quickly swallowed by the garage's silence. It was not a sound of fear, nor of aggression. It carried the edge of recognition, the soft thread of memory dogs carried in scent. The captain crouched lower, knees creaking, and peered closer. Something about the box unsettled him. It was too carefully sealed, the lid pressed down with old iron nails, edges fitted so tightly that not even dust had slipped inside. He brushed his fingers along the front and felt faint ridges beneath. The grime letters half effaced. He rubbed harder until a fragment emerged, the curve of a B followed by something he could not place. Zeus stepped forward then, one paw touching the cracked brick. The dog's movement stirred a faint draft through the cavity, carrying with it a sharper odor, one that made the captain's eyes water. It wasn't decay, not exactly, but it held a note of rust and old earth, the kind of scent that clung to objects buried and exhumed. Reeves rose to his feet, brushing dust from his hands, his gaze flicking toward the empty bay doors. Outside, the night had turned colder, and the wind pushed fine sand across the asphalt with a dry hiss. The station felt caught between stillness and shift, as though the elements themselves waited. He turned back to the box, his breath slow, measured. For a moment, he considered leaving it. Let the wall hold its secret, let the dog's instincts remain unanswered. Yet Zeus stayed fixed, muscles taut, eyes never straying. The animal's silence was a demand in itself, one Reeves could not ignore. He reached into the cavity, fingers scraping against rough brick, and gripped the edge of the box. The weight surprised him. Not heavy with stone or metal, but dense in a way that suggested layers packed tightly within. He pulled, the nails screeching faintly as the box shifted, free from its prison. When it finally settled on the concrete floor, the sound echoed too sharply, rebounding through the garage as though striking something unseen. Zeus circled the box once, nose brushing its corners, tail held stiff as a rod. Then, he sat. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, but his gaze remained locked on the sealed lid. Reeves noticed the shift. This was not anticipation but vigil, as if the dog were waiting for something older than command. The captain crouched again, tracing the nails along the lid. Some had rusted to thinness, edges brittle, while others held fast with a strength untouched by years. His thumb pressed against one until the metal flaked. He hesitated, hand hovering, caught between the instinct to pry open and the faint dread of knowing. The garage seemed to close in around him. From outside came the soft patter of drizzle against the roof, a sudden shift in weather that mirrored the unease settling in his chest. The drops tapped lightly, rhythmically, each one marking time against the moment. Zeus lowered his head then, laying his muzzle gently against the lid, an action so calm it pulled Reeves from his hesitation. The dog did not whine, did not scratch further. He only rested there, eyes half closed as if acknowledging what lay inside. That gesture, quiet and deliberate, unsettled the captain more than any frantic bark could have. When Reeves finally leaned closer, pressing his ear against the wood, he expected silence, yet from within the dense stillness, faint as a breath under earth, came a hollow thud once, then nothing. He pulled back sharply, his hand tightening on the edge of the box. Zeus lifted his head, ears tilting, eyes searching his handlers. Paced outside, the drizzle thickened into a steady curtain, washing the world in muted sound. Whatever was sealed within had not fully surrendered to silence. The sound was not brick giving way, but something softer beneath it. When Zeus tore another strip of mortar free, the air that leaked out was not stale but sharp, carrying a trace of iron, like rust or blood long dried. Captain Reeves froze, his hand still hovering near the dog's collar, though he dared not pull him back. Zeus's nostrils flared, and the low growl that followed was no longer the steady suspicion of earlier. It was edged with urgency, as if whatever scent seeped through the wall was stirring something older in him, something closer to instinct than training. The overhead light flickered once, a weak hum filling the silence. Outside, the rain had begun, tapping against the thin doors in erratic patterns, matching the rhythm of the shepherd's paws as they clawed. The drizzle grew heavier, its hiss soft but insistent, washing the station's windows in streaks that blurred the night. Reeves felt the damp press of it even from inside, the way it seemed to echo the unease curling in his chest. The dog kept working the brick, claws sliding, teeth gnashing at the edges when his paw slipped. When the first fragment fell completely free, it wasn't Reeves who leaned down, it was Zeus who stepped back, nose hovering over the opening, ears rigid and tail motionless. For a fleeting instant, Reeves thought he heard something behind it. A faint scrape or shift, but it vanished under the rainfall. He stooped anyway, his knuckles brushing the rough gap, and felt a current of cold air slide out against his skin. It was the kind of cold that didn't belong to stone, but to space, something hollow, hidden. Reeves straightened slowly, gaze fixed on Zeus. The shepherd glanced back only once, and in that brief exchange of eyes, Reeves caught something unfamiliar. Not the proud certainty of a trained rescue dog, nor the wild aggression of cornered instinct. This was hesitation, almost caution, as if the animal were weighing whether to push further or wait. Reeves had seen fear in men often enough to know its look in silence, but to see it mirrored in an animal unsettled him more. A drop of water leaked through the roof seam and struck the floor near the opening with a flat tap. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. Zeus flinched, stepping back another pace, chest rising sharply. That pause, his body rigid, head lowered but eyes wide, shifted the mood entirely. Until now, Reeves had assumed the dog was demanding release, scratching to free whatever lay behind the wall. Now he saw it differently. The posture was not of a creature wanting something revealed, but warning against it. The realization crept slow, chilling him. Zeus circled once, claws clicking against concrete, then sat just out of reach of the wall, ears turned slightly back, as though bracing for a sound. His tail did not wag, did not twitch. He sat like a sentinel, watchful but unwilling to advance. Reeves still crouched, felt a tremor in his fingers. His instincts, sharpened by years of entering burning buildings where hesitation cost lives, told him to act, to call the others, to tear the wall open, to face what was there. Yet another part of him, quieter but older, urged patience. The rain outside thickened, its steady sheet dragging down the air with a scent of wet ash from the gutters. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed briefly and then cut off, leaving the garage in its heavy silence once more. The scent leaking from the bricks had grown stronger, metallic and sour, coating the back of Reeves's throat until he wanted to spit. It was not just age, it was presence. His hand reached out unconsciously, fingers grazing Zeus's ruff for steadiness, but the dog did not look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on the fractured wall, pupils tight. The animal's stillness was worse than the scratching had been. Stillness meant decision, and decision carried weight. Reeves pushed himself to his feet. The scrape of his boots seemed too loud, as though the whole station might hear. He considered turning the overhead light off, letting the darkness hide the opening, but knew he wouldn't. The line of pale scratches in the broken brick already marked the place. It could not be unseen. Then, faintly, from behind the wall, came a sound he could not mistake. Not settling brick, not dripping water. It was brief, almost fragile, a shuffle that carried intention. Reeves's heart stopped for a beat, his breath held in his chest. Zeus let out a sound that was neither growl nor bark, but something lower, a guttural whine pressed deep in his throat. Reeves did not speak. He could not. The rain hammered harder, and the wall stood unchanged, except now it was no longer simply stone. It was a threshold. Something was on the other side, and both man and dog knew it had noticed them. The sound behind the wall came only once more, faint and hollow. Then it faded into the steady hush of rain. Zeus remained seated, his chest rising slow, his head lowered but eyes fixed on the fractured bricks, as if listening to a silence he alone could measure. Reeves stood motionless, his hand still resting against the rough edge of the wall, feeling the cool air seeping out. He waited, straining for another sign, but none came. Whatever had been there was not pressing closer. It was only reminding them it existed. The captain stepped back, his boots brushing the dust Zeus had loosened. In the uneven light, the scratches on the wall looked like claw marks left by time itself, pale scars crossing dark brick. He studied them and realized the dog had not simply been trying to tear something open. The marks had formed a shape, a shallow curve, then a second, almost like parentheses encircling the very section where the scent leaked through. It was not desperation, but marking a boundary, a warning, perhaps even a way of saying this place must be left alone. Zeus turned his head at last, glancing up at him with steady eyes. Reeves recognized what he had misread before. The dog had never been pulling toward release. He had been holding vigil. The unease, the hesitation, even the growl pressed deep in his throat. It had all been the language of caution. For all his training, for all his years of leaning on Zeus in fire and smoke, he had mistaken the signal. Now, in the quiet garage, with rain darkening the old station windows, he finally understood. The wall did not hide danger meant to be confronted. It held memory meant to be sealed. The station was older than all of them, built in an era when walls were raised as much for burial as for shelter. Whatever had been placed there, ashes, relics, perhaps even the remains of those who once guarded the town, was not crying out to be uncovered. It was reminding them of its presence, and the dog had only borne witness to it. Reeves felt the weight of that realization settle gently, like a blanket across tired shoulders. For decades he had taught recruits to charge forward, to break through, to never hesitate in the face of what waited behind walls. Yet here was Zeus, still as stone, showing him that sometimes the truest act of loyalty was restraint, to leave untouched what was not meant for hands, to honor silence rather than force answers from it. The rain eased outside, softening into a fine mist that blurred the streetlights. A breeze carried the scent of wet earth through the thin door. It seems fresh and grounding. Reeves knelt once more beside the shepherd and laid his hand against the coarse fur. This time there was no urge to command, no instinct to press further. The dog's stillness was enough. In it was dignity. Minutes passed without sound, but the dripping from the rafters, the air grew cooler, settling into a calm that felt almost protective. Reeves rose slowly and moved toward the garage doors, pausing only once to look back. Zeus remained where he was, sitting in quiet watch, eyes turned toward the faint opening. He looked less like a dog straining to reveal and more like a guardian, entrusted to remember. Reeves let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The station seemed different now, less like a place of work and more like a vessel of layered time bricks holding lives. Mortar holding secrets, air holding scents only an animal could read. He did not need to know more. It was enough to recognize that the station carried more history than he could ever unearth, and that not all history asked to be disturbed. He pulled the chain that lowered the doors and watched as the thin line of daylight vanished into shadow. The rain had left puddles outside, each reflecting the dim glow of street. A gust lifted faint traces of ash dust from the concrete and scattered them into the night. Zeus padded over at last, slow and deliberate, his paws leaving damp prints across the floor. He did not look back at the wall. His head hung steady, his gait measured, as though the decision to walk away was itself the completion of his duty. Reeves followed him out into the mist, the old firehouse looming behind them, its walls holding what they would never name. The street was empty, quiet but for the distant drip of rain from gutters. Reeves paused once more, watching the shepherd move ahead with calm certainty. For the first time, he felt the truth of what had unfolded. The wall was not a puzzle to solve. It was a reminder of limits, of how even the loyal and the brave must sometimes step back and let memory rest where it lay. Zeus stopped at the edge of a puddle, lowering his muzzle to drink, the ripples spreading until they erased his reflection. Then he lifted his head and walked on, fading slowly into the fog that curled low along the street. Reeves remained a moment longer. The firehouse door shut, the scratches left behind. A final gust of wind swept through, scattering dust across the concrete floor, lifting faint traces of paw marks that would vanish before dawn.